Hey VCEers, I did methods way back in 2009, and these are a few of the things that I remember that helped me do well. Tip 1. Write your own summary book. A lot of people will tell you that it's a waste of time to write your own summary book. You can just use the textbook or the notes that you've written down during the semester. I'd say that writing out a summary book was probably one of the most useful things I did during my revision. And the funny thing is, you probably won't even use 99% of the summary book in the exam. The act of writing out everything, in a way that you know you can find the information you need, will help you commit everything to memory and identify which topics are particular trouble spots for you. Despite never actually using the summary book, you'll feel a lot more confident going into the exam if you actually know where to find everything in your notes, rather than taking in a textbook that you're unfamiliar with. Tip 2. Practice, practice, practice. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of magic bullets that will make you a gun at methods. There is, however, a slow-acting regular bullet, and that's to do as many practice questions as you can. When your teacher tells you to do every odd question, I'd strongly recommend doing the even ones while you're at it. It will put you at an advantage compared to the rest of the class, and the repetition will help reinforce your knowledge. Don't forget that there's no point in repetitively doing questions if you don't understand what you're doing. Make sure that in every question you're doing, you understand exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. There's no formulas in methods that you shouldn't understand exactly what's going on. It's not a bad idea to run through the derivation of some of the more disconnected formulas, like the differentiation and integration formulas, to make sure that you understand how everything comes together. It will help your confidence in doing straight differentiation and integration questions, but it will also give you the ability to answer more complex and abstract questions that will stump the other students. Tip 3. Write out every step. It's pretty tempting to skip the easier parts and use shortcuts, especially when you're doing long questions or doing a whole lot of similar questions. But at the end of the day, the biggest hurdle for a lot of people is simply trying to eliminate silly mistakes. It's human nature to make mistakes, unfortunately, and the best thing that you can do is make finding those mistakes as easy as possible. If you write out every step on a separate line and line up your equal signs, you can trace your way back through and hopefully identify mistakes more successfully. I can't tell you how many times I've checked over my messier work and thought it was 100% free of mistakes, yet as soon as one is pointed out to you, it becomes very obvious. Tip 4. Keep a list of all the mistakes you make during revision. It might sound pretty pessimistic to keep a list of your shortcomings, but you'll pretty quickly start to identify those silly little mistakes that are costing you marks on every SAC. There's a bunch of little things in methods that are really minor in the context of your understanding, but you'll lose a mark if you don't include them. For example, adding the plus c to an indefinite integral, or remembering that when x squared equals 4, x could also be negative 2. Once you've built up a solid list of mistakes, you can use this like a checklist in your summary book to quickly run over after you answer a question. Do the "is my answer reasonable" test after each question, especially if you end up with negative numbers. That's not to say that a negative number is always incorrect, but it's often a warning sign. For example, you can't have a negative area or a negative probability. If you're going to need to plug this number into a log or a square root later, a negative isn't going to fly. Tip 5. Know your calculator back to front, inside and out. There's a bunch of questions on methods exams that can be solved entirely using a calculator in a matter of seconds. Specifically, things like the solve function and finding minimum and maximum values from graphs. Not knowing exactly how to use your calculator will cost you precious seconds come exam time, so learning and practicing calculator functions is every bit as important as your other study. Tip 6. But don't become reliant on your calculator. Be careful, there's a huge trap here in letting the calculator do all the work without understanding what you're doing. I'd highly recommend avoiding the calculator wherever you can when you're doing homework to make sure you actually know how things work and how to tackle the more abstract questions. Know your limitations and know when using a calculator is simply to remove a bit of the grunt work and when you're skipping steps and taking shortcuts. I personally prefer to do everything by hand when possible and then use the CAS as a checking tool. There's plenty of marks allocated to working, and if you let the CAS do too much of the work and you make a mistake, you're not going to be able to scrape as many marks. At the end of the day, you need to work out what works best for you. I know a bunch of people who would recommend using the calculator for everything and going back and doing things by hand afterwards. Again, only practice will let you know what works and what doesn't for you. Hopefully you've been able to get something useful out of these tips. Again, these are just the things that worked for me, but everyone is different, so do whatever works for you.